All right, welcome back again. This is our third video, and I'm going to finish going over the different structures that we use in inductive Bible study. Again, I can't stress enough, continue to look at the textbooks for examples. This is just a framework to go over those, and if you have any questions, post them online into the classroom, and I'll try to answer as many of the questions as I can. Okay, we've looked at the first three structures: recurrence, and then contrast and comparison. Again, remember the key rule. A major structure is a structure that connects two or more main units or controls 50% of the material. All right, let's go and we'll take another pair. Let's look at causation and substantiation. All right, both of these deal with cause and effect, and they're essentially two sides of the same coin: causation and substantiation. Causation is where one unit essentially, or one section, talks about the cause, and then what follows the cause is the effect or the takeaway. So an example of that, if we're looking at a book as a whole, would be something like the book of Romans. And a lot of Paul's letters are structured like this. So for example, Romans 12, and one of the key words to recognizing a causation is the presence of a word like therefore or thus. So think of Romans 12:1. Therefore, in light of the mercies of God, I exhort you to present your body as a living sacrifice, right? And then Paul goes on. But that signals a major piece, that phrase, in light of God's mercies. What's Paul saying, essentially? He's saying that the first 11 chapters of Romans, I've given you the cause. I've given you the reason that I'm now going to give you this following set of exhortations to show you how to live that life out. And so Romans is set up by a simple causation. The first 11 chapters are the cause, where essentially Paul lays out his understanding of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And then Romans 12 to 16, he gives the takeaways, the so what, the effect of all that. So that's when you have a move from cause to effect. Substantiation is the opposite. That's where you have the effect given and then the reasons for it. If causation is signaled by the word therefore or thus or so, substantiation is signaled by the English words because or for, F-O-R. So for example, think about Jesus' opening sermon in Matthew or in Mark. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. That one verse is structured by substantiation. We have the effect, that's what? Repent, the exhortation, and then the cause is the presence of the kingdom. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. The whole book of Revelation is set up this way. In the first 3 chapters of Revelation, John gives the exhortations to those 7 churches. And then chapters 4 to the end of Revelation, John lays out the reasons why the churches should be living that way. And essentially it's live holy lives now in the present courageously, because God has the future absolutely secure and it's going to be beautiful. That's substantiation. Okay, the next structure is introduction, also called preparation realization. In other words, this is a part of the text that introduces what's coming up. So oftentimes you'll get a description of the setting. In most or many passages are going to have some kind of an introduction to them. They're going to set out themes that then are going to be explored in the rest of the book. It's one of the easier ones to actually understand conceptually. Now, a key piece, though, is what? If it's going to be an introduction, where do you think you'll probably find it in the text? At the end, right? Of course not, right? Just remember this, intros are intros. They're at the beginning. Okay, I know it's a terrible joke, but we're going to find a couple other structures that you just have to think, because sometimes you'll say, hey, this is that, and I'm like, wait a second, it doesn't make any sense. If it's going to be introduction, it's not going to be at the middle or the end. It's going to be at the beginning. So just remember that one. You won't have any problem with that. Okay, pivot or cruciality. This is a structure that you'll find in some texts, and it's a pivot is you'll have a key text, a pivotal text that will serve either to, well, it will always reverse what comes before it. The reverse may go from going really well to then having a pivotal passage and things go bad, or it could be everything's going really bad and then there's a pivotal passage and it turns for the good. Let me give you an example of both. In Genesis, if we read Genesis 2 to 3, they go together. Genesis chapter 2, just kind of trace that out. That's the creation story, and if you can imagine that, everything is beautiful. God puts humanity in a garden, and you essentially have perfect relationships between humanity and God, between humanity and creation, and between the man and the woman, right? Well, what would the pivotal passage be that makes a big turn? That's going to be that conversation with the serpent, and then the aftermath where God will come and say, humanity or Adam, where are you? And then things go downhill as we find brokenness comes. But that pivotal passage there would be that sin in the garden that reverses the goodness of creation and moves it over towards brokenness. Now, David's life also fits here, with the pivotal passage being that Bathsheba scene. On the other hand, there's some positive crucialities too. So, for example, in the book of Esther, the fate of the Jews is looking really bad until you have that pivotal moment when Esther goes to the king, and then it reverses. That's cruciality or pivot. Now, what goes on here, there's a couple of things. Key to this is there's going to be a contrast between these two sides, okay? But it's not just contrast, it's a contrast that has a pivot in the middle. And in some ways, the pivot then is a cause for what comes on this side. Okay, that's important to see that the pivot is the cause of the turn. And then usually this spirals out. There's a climax here, either a negative climax in this case, or in this case, there's a positive climax because this is moving towards a happier piece here. So notice that pivot implicitly holds contrast, causation, and climax as part of what a pivot is. Okay, well, I just mentioned climax. Climax is also its own structure. Climax, it can be a positive climax or it can be a negative climax. But essentially, climax is how a text leads and moves towards a high place. Now, obviously, there's going to be a climactic passage, and the climax will generally be where in a passage. It's going to be at the end. Again, you don't find a climax at the beginning or even in the middle. You're going to have something else. The climax, the true climax of a story, the major climax is going to be near the end. Otherwise, what do you have? You end up having anticlimactic stuff. And then the key to seeing climax is then to trace it out, how the whole story or text moves towards that climactic moments. Okay, another structure would be interrogation. Interrogation or problem solution. That's where a text is organized essentially in a way that either answers a question that could be implicit or explicitly asked, or it presents a problem and then gives a solution. So we'll list it up here. Call it problem, solution, or interrogation. So, for example, Psalm 121 says, I lift my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My helper is the Lord. Now, that sets up for the rest of the psalm a problem and a solution. The problem is, who is my helper? It's going to be the Lord, right? And so those verses 1 and 2 are set up as problem solution. I look to the hills. Where does my help come from? Verse 2 is the answer. My help comes from the Lord. Now, the book of Genesis is a problem solution if you think about it, and this is more implicit. Okay, in Genesis 1 to 11, that's the problem. The problem is God's beautiful, perfect world has been broken by humans exceeding their place through human sin that's fractured creation and created a lost humanity. Well, what's God's solution? It's the calling of a new missional people through whom God is going to then bless that Genesis 1 to 11 world. That's the problem. The solution is God's calling of a people. That's problem solution. Again, we have a couple of more structures we're going to go over in the next video, and then we'll hopefully wrap things up with the next video as well. Again, major structures: control the bulk of the material, connect main units, begin to continue to review by reading and looking at the examples in our textbooks, and this will begin to make more and more sense. All right, we'll see you in the next video.